Welcome back to the Real Femme Sapien YouTube channel where I give cultural commentary. Also, I am a very resourceful gal and I do like to refer you all to different individuals out there that you might align with. That way you can have some sense of community. Although beware, parasocial relationships are upon us. So like just be cool, guys. So I found a group of gentlemen and I wouldn't say that they're red pill or blue pill. I would argue that they're probably bro pilled. Take that how you want to take it. But it just seems like a group of men that genuinely enjoy writing together and socializing with one another. And I know that my audience is predominantly male right now at this point in time. Also, it's probably always going to be predominantly male. Shout out to YouTube. So if this is more on your beat, then you can connect with these gentlemen through the link that's in the description down below. They are avid members of Substack, so that's really neat. So if you like this content, make sure you give it a big thumbs up, subscribe down below, and hit the notification bell. Toward the halfway point, I anticipate this taking an hour and a half to 2 hours. Toward the halfway point, I am going to turn the chat to members only. And that will give you gentlemen out there and some women too, why not? Ask your questions too. I ask men questions all the time. That'll give you guys the opportunity to ask those questions without getting mangled up in the regular chat as well. And in the description down below, there are 2 products for you ladies out there. Men, if you love a woman out there, there's a femininity course that has a biblical core to it. It's about courtship, not dating. And I would argue that it's probably worth it, just given that the woman who made the course, her husband delivered their last 2 babies by hand. So I would just think, like, if I had to get advice about how to get a lumberjack, that would be the way I would go about it. And there are some smooth belladonna candles that are in the description down below. You can use coupon code ALY10 at checkout. I just happen to really like those candles. I don't get paid to sell them. I want to keep selling them so that I can keep getting them. That's how we do this. All right, I'm going to pull up the men one by one. You guys have never met these guys before. So they're going to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do. Good morning, Morgan. Hey, Morgan, my people in my chat. Morgan wants you guys to like the video. Wahlberger says, we shall see how cool they may be, Aly. Be nice. Be nice. Well, okay, not nice. Be cool. Don't be a spurg on this Sunday morning. It just would not be the move. All right, so let's pull on Harrison and have him introduce himself to the people.
Hi everyone, I'm Harrison Cayley. I write a Substack called Ponerology, and I also have a YouTube channel called Mind Matters, where we talk about and interview guests on politics, psychology, religion, spirituality, philosophy. I do that with Luke, who's also on the stream today. And actually, cool news, the next interview we're putting up, actually I'll probably put it up after we do this live stream, is an interview with Michael Rechtenwald on the Great Reset. So it's a good one. So I recommend people to check it out.
So I've been trying to tell you guys. I was like, what do I call you? It has to be philosophical. They're like, well, we're not philosophical. I'm like, okay, let's look at this IQ bell curve situation. I would argue that you guys are a philosophical bunch. Let me pull on Luke next so he can introduce himself to the people, give him the rundown.
Yeah, hi. So nice to be here. My name is Luke, and as Harrison said, we're doing a YouTube channel together, Mind Matters, and I also have a Substack where I like to talk about more in-depth philosophical stuff, but also with an eye to the real world, so to say. And yeah, as we will hear later, we all have written about masculinity, or what we call tonic masculinity in one form or another. So I think we'll dive into that later.
Very cool. We're gonna pull on Mark. Hello, how are you?
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Mark Pisone. And since September of last year, I've been writing a Substack called The Cat Was Never Found, which is something new to me. And so is podcasting, by the way. So I hope I don't botch it. I think the success that I've had with my writing so far, I mostly owe to Harrison and to John Carter, because they boosted my work early on. And like Harrison, I mainly write about evil, but more from a spiritual and technological perspective. I also use the blog to report certain experiments that I do. For instance, I recently wrapped up a series in which I was able to regularly exploit weaknesses and trigger fatal errors in ChatGPT and its large language model. And on our Demo Station Slack, I run a channel called Zero Bit Computing, in which we trade tips and tricks on how to spot and disable other evil robots in the wild, because there are a lot of them running around these days. And apart from that, I guess I'm on the same spiritual journey as a lot of people are these days. I'm trying to make sense of this insane clown dimension we've all been teleported into and figure out the best ways to fight back.
Yeah, I call it clown world buffoonery. I get yelled at all the time by women if I just tell them facts, such as, 50.1% of us are childless right now. Marriage is at a rate of 6 per 1,000. What's the other one that grinds their gears? Oh, yeah. 45% of women are projected to be single by 2030 between the ages of 22 and 45 per Morgan Stanley. Like, these big banks are investing in this new wave of single women that are coming out there. So yes, it is a clown world that we live in. We cannot fix it. We can only cope. And you guys have found a really cool way to cope. Like, name a cooler man club where you just write together. I know none. Let's pull on Doc Hammer next. We do have, you guys had an extra additional member, John. He's in the background right now, so we'll pull him up as well toward the end. All right, Doc Hammer, give us the rundown.
Okay. I'm a Dr. Eric Hammer. I'm a doctor of economics and a blacksmith. Everybody assumes it's the other way around, but blacksmithing is kind of a later thing in life. But I mostly met these guys through writing on a Substack around economics and philosophical commentary with kind of a focus on virtue and, trying to bring things down a little bit closer to reality as opposed to the kind of high-flying psychosis of theory that you see going on a lot on the internet, and trying to apply all that to regular life.
Yeah, because social contagions, that's not real. No one's catching Tourette's from TikTok. Okay, let's pull Grant on. Hello, how are you?
Hey, Aly, thanks for having us. Grant
anytime.
Smith. It's good to be here. I'm a Army physical therapist, working as a health and fitness director, and write on Substack with all these esteemed gentlemen, what Mark has called an august body. Always learn new vocab words from him. And primarily interested in human performance optimization, but especially these days, the spiritual angle. And in that regard, collaborating with these folks has been tremendously helpful. I also started a podcast called Fifth Generation Leadership, where I interview, it's been all military folks so far, some senior officers, senior enlisted, where we talk about kind of what's going on right now, leadership lessons, things that they've picked up over their careers. And that's it.
Look at you trying to save the military. Thank God, because it is not going well. Okay. Daniel, hello.
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel. I guess I'm not as tonically masculine as these other guys, but I'll serve as a cautionary tale. Like, kids at home, you don't want to wind up like me, learn from my mistakes. So I have a few of those I could share, and contribute to this conversation.
You might have to talk a little bit loud, because if on your headphones, the microphone is wherever that chunky piece of plastic is.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is
There
that better?
you go.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
sorry.
so much better. No, it's okay.
See how tech savvy I am.
Well, it might make you feel better if you knew that Jordan Peterson has done many a podcast with a stringed microphone holding it up. So it's like you're in good company. Do not
Okay,
stress.
cool. Following in good footsteps there.
Yeah, but you don't have to hold it up the whole time. And then we
right.
have John. Let's pull him on. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So I'm John Carter. I'm a fictional character from an early 20th century science fantasy series. I write a Substack called Postcards from Barsoom. I'm not exactly sure how I would classify the subject matter. I tend to rotate through a variety of subjects, whatever catches my interest at the time. Mostly I'm trying to grapple with the nature of the black iron prison in which we find ourselves and try to articulate how we get out of the longhouse, I think would be sort of my main interest. What comes next after this beast system comes down.
So you think the system will collapse, like in a good way? You know, it'll be a rebirth of sorts. You think there's a chance?
I'm rather hoping for a kind of ludic preference cascade of the sort that brought down the Soviet Union and the other Eastern Bloc Soviet states in the early 1990s. I could see something like that happening maybe in the near future, but that might just be my wishful thinking at work.
Yeah, I'm on that let it burn level right now where it's like it's like, look, man, there's people that get it and then there's useful idiots. Like you're going to have to decide what category you fall in. Hopefully you take life lessons along the way. So I have some random questions that came into my mind. The first thing I wanted to ask Mark was, in your opinion, playing around with Chat GPT, do you believe it has a left leaning?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've written extensively about what the training methods are for ChatGPT, and I've tried to kind of straddle technology, the tech part of it with what I think it is in a larger cultural sense, because essentially it's a mechanical mirror, and it's also a copycat. And it's trained in certain ways. I've called it a Baldlerization level of training, where it's at a fundamental level beyond which, the fact that OpenAI calls itself OpenAI is a lie, quite frankly. Like so much of it is under the hood.
Oh.
And what's under the hood is a layer of training that pushes forward various agendas, all of them left wing. Whether you're talking about DEI or anti-racism or globalism, and everything from climate change to transhumanism, transgenderism. It's the entire package, and it's been trained to do that. Now, obviously, some people have jailbroken it through prompt engineering, but here's the problem. The problem is that when, not if, but when these sorts of large language modules are released into the atmosphere of the internet, they're going to be jailbroken too, and they're going to pretend to be humans. And one of the things that ChatGPT, in its the illusionary form that it exists now, is it pretends that it can't pretend to be human. It lies that it's not capable of lying. And that's the way it was programmed to be.
Huh, I never thought about that. Yeah, okay. Okay, this is fun. This is not increasing my existential anxiety at all. Everything is okay. And then one little small question, and then we can go to the big questions, the big four that we had in our chat earlier today. Doc Hammer, why blacksmithing? How does one, find themselves in this situation? It's a very cool hobby, like super badass. I'm not gonna lie.
I think at some point it was just nominative determinism. Your name's Hammer, you got to become a carpenter or a blacksmith, and I hate working with wood. So, but that was just sort of a tail end of kind of that COVID psychosis we got into, where it was like all the social things I wanted to do were basically illegal, and nobody was doing them anyway. And so I was like, well, I used to do some leather work and some other things, and I guess I'll make knives now. And I gotta say, there was like a YouTuber. Small shout out to Old Hickory Forge, where he was watching some videos and he had a good review of a $150 forge from Amazon, like this kit, and like, boom, bought it today, and within a few weeks it was all set. But it's one of those things. It's a nice hobby, and when you spend a lot of your time sitting at a desk arguing with people and sitting hunched over and angry all the time, it's really good to be able to go out, stretch your shoulders, and beat the ever-loving hell out of something.
Where are you arguing with people on Twitter? Like, where are these arguments happening?
Oh, no, work. I work in industry.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of, yeah.
No, I get it. I understand. Okay, so in the mainstream, we have a couple of contortions of masculinity. On the right, we have the plow horse husband who is to pay bills and to never be thanked. And he just has this lot in life. And then over on the left side of things, basically, if you're masculine at all, then somehow you're toxic, unless it's to the benefit of women. So if we all remember Roe v. Wade, women were coming out wondering, where are all the men to advocate for us? You told them no uterus, no opinion, though. So I'm just kind of confused, ladies. But what is this tonic masculinity that you guys are presenting as an alternative?
Should someone go first?
It could be any of you.
think
This will
Brent-
happen a lot. Don't worry about it. It's normal.
Harrison, you're next. You go first.
All right. Well, well, John's explained this well in his article. I think most of us, if not all of us, have an article, at least one article that we did on tonic masculinity. And the idea is basically that, like you mentioned, there are these different conceptions of masculinity. And if you look at the way the word's used in the mainstream, it's either just neutral in the sense of masculinity, or it's toxic. And when you have toxic masculinity, that has the tendency to then apply to masculinity as a whole. So all masculinity becomes toxic. And so you see this, I mean, I've seen it play out over the last 5-10 years, where the only real reference you see to masculinity then is to masculinity as toxic. And you see this in the way that men are represented in media nowadays. I just saw an article the other day on the new Dungeons and Dragons movie, and how the writers explicitly and with intent emasculated the characters in order to elevate the female characters. And they said, this was our agenda, this is what we wanted to do, so that's how we wrote the characters. And it's nice to see it stated explicitly, but for anyone watching movies, it's been clear that that's what's been going on for the last several years, where you see males just deliberately emasculated and either presented as toxic in the sense of violent, closed-minded, selfish, all those sort of things, or stupid, incompetent, inept at anything they do. And so tonic masculinity, tonic is pretty much the opposite of toxic. It is everything that's awesome in the world, and it's just essentially a way of introducing a new word hopefully into the general lexicon, to get across the idea that, oh wow, there's something that is masculine that isn't toxic. In fact, it's tonic. A tonic is something you take to heal, to gain vigor. And that's one of the things that's missing in that kind of like incompetent, inept masculinity that you see, is there's no vigor, there's none of that like masculine spirit, the kind of adventuring and exploring spirit. And essentially, it's a new word for an old thing, because I'd pretty much equate it to virtue, because the root of the word virtue is the Latin word vir, or vir, which is man. Like, there was essentially, virtue was manliness, roughly translated. So tonic masculinity is a way of kind of reintroducing just what is essentially positive masculinity and effective masculinity.
Mhm.
Not to be confused with effective altruism.
Okay. Well, I mean, that would take a whole other tangent if we got into that one. I think Doc Hammer, you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, if I could jump in on the back of that, well, those ideas are still fresh in the head. That's been very much my approach too, is looking at it one from the side of virtue, but the economist in me is saying, a lot of this has to do with how men and women complement each other and can do different things. How do they interact? How do they cooperate to make the world? And I think a lot of what's gone horribly wrong in the world in the past 40 odd years or so has just been this idea that we don't need one another. We're all going to be exactly the same, and everyone's going to do everything. And so there's no reason to interact or, have somebody who's different, because one, that's a threat. And two, well, why do we need it? Women can do all the things that men do just as well, perfectly in all respects. And, men should be just like women. And I think that's, obviously false. We're a very sexually dimorphic species. And there's a lot of things that, men can do that women don't do so well. A lot of things that women do that men don't do so well. And, learning to cooperate is important. And at the same time, as you point out, you brought up the idea of mainstream masculinity, which is very different from what mainstream masculinity was 40, 50, 60, 100 years ago. And I think we've been seeing that now that we've gotten that idea in our cultural zeitgeist that men shouldn't be good at being men. They should be just the same as women and be good at being men the way women are good at being women. We've seen men hair off that path. You can think of like an Aristotelian virtue of saying, no, it's being in the middle. You go too far one way, it's a vice. Too far the other way, it's a vice. And I think lately we've seen men either become far too feminine and lose all of their masculine virtues going into vice, or they become some strange hyper-masculinity taken to an extreme, which becomes an extreme vice as well. And so for me, at least, a lot of this idea is bringing it back to the middle and recognizing that, you know, the middle of virtue for men is different than the middle of virtue for women. And then using that, saying, how can we cooperate together? Because, you know, despite what people are, the transhumanists at least, are trying to hope, we're going to need each other for the foreseeable future. And, you know, there's big differences in what we're good at and what we're not.
Oh, I cannot wait for this stuff to blow up in these people's faces. They're so wrong. Like, I am so excited for these feminists to come out and admit that surrogacy is wrong. I'm just like, I'm waiting. You know what? I think academia is really failing men for two reasons. Because I like to play around with mental models in my mind. So, well, that was implied with the word. One of the things that struck me was I keep hearing about this phenomenon in male psychology called the nothing box. Like, it's rumored that you guys have the ability to think about nothing, right? If you're just in a peaceful state in comparison to women. But I was thinking about this because I had a lot of hormonal fluctuations in my first trimester. I'm pregnant right now. I'm in my third trimester. But in that first trimester, I legitimately thought I was losing my mind. And so I was thinking about how much my cognition was impacted by my hormones. And I was wondering, well, what if men, you know, do think differently and they just don't want to investigate it or publish it? It seems like academia has a bigger obsession with kind of parsing apart how women think versus how men think. I don't think they want to give you guys any validity. And the other thing that I noted about masculinity is even though people will come out and harp on dark triad traits, they are inherently masculine. Nobody thinks about a serial killer doc and thinks about women. And this is like not to put men in a bad light, but women are still watching it, you know? And it's so they, instead of painting a virtuous masculine character, they're like, let's throw this dark triad guy out there, because you could apply those same dark triad traits to, you know, an accomplished conqueror with a wife and children, but they'll never publish anything like that. So it's an easy way for the mainstream media to get profit while still, I guess, tickling women's fancy, if you will. Okay, so what else do you guys have about mainstream masculinity, tonic masculinity? Feel free to chime in at any point in time.
So I could say a few words. I sort of thought of it as like a revaluation of values. So the left, when they introduced this toxic masculinity idea, they essentially painted everything good and strong about masculinity as a bad thing, right? And this was especially on my mind a couple of days ago when Kamala Harris's wife, her husband, was going on about toxic masculinity and how men need to take a back seat and be sort of more passive and in a supporting role and all of these kinds of sentiments, which I guess on the left is what now qualifies as being a good man, is literally just not being a man. So by introducing the idea of tonic masculinity and establishing that contrast, we can then flip the script again and say, actually, no, toxic masculinity is the absence of masculinity to a certain degree, as well as, you know, when it goes a little bit too far, when you have the serial killer, for instance. And just to riff off of that, that remark, because I have found it very interesting that over the last several years, so many women, it seems like every other girl that I see on Tinder is, you know, talking about how much they love watching true crime dramas, right? That's like,
I know,
thing. And
writing letters to serial killers in prison.
Exactly. Yes. You know, marrying Charles Manson, right? And like, there's always been, you know, an element of that, but that seems to have really become a thing in the last several years. And I wonder if that's because there's been this general sort of sexual depolarization that's happened, where men have become less manly and more effeminate. But women, frankly, a lot of them are, you know, not so attractive either these days. And as a result of that, women are looking around in their lives and they're not seeing all that. They're not seeing manly men around them. And, you know, so they overcorrect by looking for these kind of extreme dark triad kinds of guys, which, you know, is not healthy either. So that's kind of the utility of this idea of pushing this into the lexicon, is it gets people sort of like thinking like, okay, masculinity itself, this is like a neutral thing, really, but there's good and there's bad aspects of that. And how do we sort of emphasize the good, you know, the virtues, as Harrison and Doc were both saying. You know, one thing that I haven't written about yet, but I have an article that's been sort of banging around in the back of my mind for a while, is, you know, if you ask people, what are the 7 deadly sins? Even in this sort of post-religious age, most people are going to have an idea of what at least a few of them are, right? Yeah, yeah, exactly. You're nodding. It was like, you know, exactly. But do you know what the 7 virtues are?
Oh, how dare you? How dare you flip that around on me? No, I do not.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So you've got the cardinal virtues, the pagan virtues, that Aristotle or Plato or Plutarch would talk about, which are fortitude, prudence, temperance, and justice. And then you've got the 3 Christian virtues or heavenly virtues layered on top of that later on by the church, which are faith, hope, and charity, which, you know, to my mind, those 7, I'm not even particularly Christian myself, but I think they really do sort of encompass a very holistic map of, you know, what the really developed man looks like. And this used to be a huge preoccupation. Virtue was a preoccupation in schools of philosophy, classics departments, and so on, that really just kind of permeated discussion in the 19th century and before. You know, cultivating virtue in the youth was a major concern. And it's something that we just do not talk about anymore. Instead, we talk about values, our values, right? So Harrison was pointing out the linguistic origins of virtue as being this, you know, like man, you know, virtue is kind of like a battlefield strength, right? Whereas value, this is like a marketplace term, kind of, you know. That's, if you trace it further back, it's not, you know, everything ultimately turns into some kind of physical metaphor, but the way value is used now is this is something that you hold, right? It's something that you say, oh, I value this, I value tolerance, I value democracy, I value freedom. But these are just words. What do they really mean? They say nothing about your inner character.
Oh,
Do you mind if I pick up on this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean that's the point. I would say don't forget, you other gentlemen out there, don't forget to chime in. It's talking live can be a challenge, but you just insert yourself and you'll get in. But go ahead, Mark.
Oh, insert myself. Okay, I will insert myself. I think so. I agree with what everyone said so far. I think, though, that first and foremost, like when I think about tonic masculinity, I think it starts with the recognition that there are both masculine and feminine traits, which is something that's been sort of lost or stolen, and that none of those traits are inherently evil. I think that the big problem is that we live in an environment where not only are masculine traits demonized, but a sort of a warped, twisted version of femininity is worshipped to the degree that terrifyingly large numbers of men are adopting those twisted feminine traits. And when I say, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was thinking about transmaxing. I don't know if you heard about that one. So basically there's incels that are coming out and deciding that they'll just be trans women because they might get the chicks that way. So this is, I mean, it's a very, very small minority of the population, though. But yes, it is getting pretty
kind
extreme.
of octopus or fish that does that, like where they pretend to be a female in order to
cuttlefish.
I forget, but
it's cuttlefish. Yes. Continue.
Cuttlefish. That's
awesome.
Well, see, but I think the problem is we live in an environment where. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. I was just saying cuttlefish are awesome because they're weirdly like humans and very, very, very strange animals.
Weirdly, yes, you're right, Doc. Weirdly, But I think that the problem is that we live in an environment where not only are masculine traits demonized, but a sort of a, it's like sort of like so if the Frankenstein's monster model, right? Like I'm a man and I have masculine traits, and I'm being told constantly that, like, no, adopt feminine traits, even though they are contrary to every instinct that you have, right? And what you end up with is a kind of this mindlessly destructive and hyper emotive being that lays waste to civilization, essentially. And I think the same could be said of women who adopt a broken model of masculinity, right? Like I saw, what was it, Rings of Power recently, where they transformed Galadriel into Galadriel, and now she's in a suit of armor and she's pretending to be a male warrior. And this is not this is nothing to say against women in general, but it's just sort of like this model is a broken model. Like if a man is trying to become to be a woman, he's going to be a bad woman. And if a woman is trying to be a man, she's going to be a bad man. And it's terrifying in that sense, because it essentially means an entire broken world, which is kind of what I think we're in. Like I kind of think, when I think of tonic masculinity, one way I like to think of it is a construction site, right? And I think we've all talked about this before. Hard hats and all, like we're cooperating in the task of building each other up in masculine ways, but like not the kind of forced cooperation that the communists want, where we lose our individuality and drive, and just in some sense our souls. Not the Borg, right? Instead, I think that and I think that the gentleman here could probably agree. Part of it is like another masculine trait, which is competition and competitiveness, right? Like, in other words, like, do you remember in Lord of the Rings, like Gimli and Legolas, they had that little game that they would play, right? Where it's like, even though they're cooperating in this task of confronting this heinous evil, there's still game of men can make a sport of anything, like that's one of our deals, right? Like it's one of the parts of being a spirit in a masculine body, is that we just make a sport of anything. And like it's and that's part of like what separates us from the Marxists, I believe is John's term. What separates us is that we could compete in a constructive way, right? We could turn saving the world into a game, and it's not a zero-sum game, right? It's like we can push each other towards greater success in our individual lives, and at the same time rebuild the world into a sane and moral place, if that makes any sense.
So, Mark, I want to expand on that. The way what you said about playing to strengths, like I want to expand on that, but just regarding competition, I want to point out something that people don't tend to notice, but everybody competes. And stereotypically, men have a certain way they compete and women have a certain way that they compete, and it's different. And the way that men compete is more direct. The way that women compete is more indirect. And tying into, the study of evil and pathocracy, our common interests, when people are engaging in indirect competition and that becomes the social norm in complex organizations, it creates a huge opening for psychopaths to accrue power and dominate socially, when they're not able to do so as easily in conditions where direct competition is the norm and indirect competition is seen as cowardly and weak. The other thing I wanted to expand on is, you said, focusing on strengths. Like a woman's never going to be a good man, and a man's never going to be like the best woman, right? This idea of playing to strengths is one of the reasons why the market economy works. It's division of labor. We all have things that we're good at, and this inability to play to our strengths is incredibly destructive economically. And that's one of these major blind spots that's just, you can measure it in dollars and cents, where, people aren't willing to take advantage of their natural, innate gifts and strengths because they're not quote unquote acceptable or what are socially desirable. I would argue that all of this is just a form of indirect competition. Where women are at this and men using the same indirect method of competing. So, generally weak men that wouldn't succeed in a direct competition are using this method of indirect competition and saying, you're not allowed to use these strengths that we don't have. And all of society suffers for it.
It's interesting you say that. So with my platform, I interview a lot of housewives. Well, I mean, they've got side hustles too. One is a full-blown lawyer, but I interview a lot of wives as well who work. But basically, it's really easy to come out and say that not all men are trash when I have women that are happy, joyful, fulfilled, and well cared for by their men that come on the platform and they say like, hey, no, these are some really good qualities. And the ones that I've interviewed so far, they do seem to have competent men and none of their husbands are obese. So it's like, we can play this game all we want, but I think that when you're faced with children that are raised in well-rounded two-parent households with the masculine and the feminine, it kind of speaks for itself. Also, I would say this is really interesting. Being a woman that has worked online and a woman that's worked in the military, it's frustrating for women as well because men are adopting feminine social, I guess, ways to attack women that they have to compete with in the workforce. So on a couple of occasions, there will be men who would basically undermine me, or I don't even know how to word this, or start rumors, right? Like grown men starting rumors about me, a female coworker, when all he ever had to do was outwork me. So that this stuff is affecting women all the time in the workplace. My husband shares some stories as well. So if you're dealing with petulant women, just understand that sometimes we're dealing with feminine men these days who are completely content to throw us under the bus for a promotion. And it makes absolutely no sense. Like, I mean, anyway, that's my little tidbit on that. You guys continue. I'm just having fun.
So it might not be a popular opinion, but I think some degree of what we're talking about here might be inevitable when you start having workplaces that are as heavily mixed as our own, which is, if you look, most societies historically would segregate the economic activities of men and women, and particularly in dangerous occupations, or things like the military or construction, or occupations playing to male strengths, it would be dominated by men, and the caring occupations, home crafts, things like that would be dominated typically by women. And I think part of the reason for that is precisely that men and women do have very different competitive strategies. And men, frankly, feel kind of bad competing with women the way they would compete with men, right? Like, there's the old joke that if you get in a fight with a girl, like, there's no way you can win it. If you win, you beat up a girl. And if you lost, you got beat by a girl, like it's a lose-lose situation. And I think what's happening in the workforce, this is partially being heavily encouraged by the surrounding culture, is that men have no option but to compete the way that women compete increasingly. It's sort of the flip side of what it was, say, back in the 1970s, where women were coming into the workforce and they were having to compete with men and be better at it than men are now. It's the opposite. And I don't think anyone likes it very much. Like you were saying, it's very frustrating for women as well. It's very frustrating for men who would prefer more direct forms of competition and more sort of openly organized male competence hierarchies, rather than worrying about, does everyone, I saw a comment like, you have to feel good about the plan now, everyone has to be on board in the communal workspace. Yeah, that comment was totally on board, or totally on point. And I mean, I hate it, and I think a lot of people really do. And I don't think that we would need to have like explicit laws like men can't do this and women can't do that. I think for the most part, people's natural inclinations will draw them towards certain kinds of occupations. And one of the problems that we have now as a society is that there's this huge push to get women into various kinds of occupations that they're maybe not actually terribly interested in. Like, do a lot of women really want to be engineers?
You kid. What do you mean? There's an overwhelming data that shows egalitarian societies become more sexist. How shocking. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
exactly what I was going to mention. Yes, if you look at the
Mhm.
Scandinavian social democracies, which are the most sort of have the greatest degrees of gender parity, they have some of the highest degrees of segregation in the workforce, because women don't want to be engineers and police officers for the most part, and men don't really want to work in kindergartens or be nurses.
Mhm.
If we just let people, if we let water find its own level instead of trying to force things with social engineering, we would all be so much happier.
Mhm.
I
Well-
agree. And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You guys are here. You guys are the guests. Go off.
No, I was just to riff off of that a little bit. Like I was thinking about, because we've all been talking about masculine and feminine traits, and like again, they exist. They're part of us. They're part of the material world to an extent, but we don't really talk about what some of those are. And like, for instance, like if I had to boil masculinity down to one word, right? What would it be? It would be focus. And what I mean by focus is a kind of single-minded determination to solve a problem by breaking it down into parts. Like that's something that I think that generally speaking, again, it's a tendency, it's a trait, it's a group trait, but that's something that men particularly seem geared to do very well. And again, I don't think it's evil or good. As a matter of fact, like it all, as with everything else, it all depends on what you're focusing on. What are you focusing that masculine laser on? Why are you taking the thing apart? Or what are you going to do afterwards? What are you going to do with those broken parts?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I write a lot, as a lot of you gentlemen know, I write a lot about myths and legends and folklore, which, you know, I think in many ways are more important than facts in history, you know, when you're trying to get to the truth of something, including the truth of what it means to be a spirit inhabiting a male form. You know, our forms were shaped for violence, relatively speaking. We all know that. You know, we see it replicated in nature all around us, except with insects, which is a different story.
Mhm.
But those forms, you know, we're going to generate a lot of myths about violence as a result. And I think these include myths like, you know, like Tolkien's Fellowship, as well as like the bad myths, because there are bad myths. There are toxic masculine myths. You know what I'm saying? Like you take something like the Babylonian creation myth, which I've talked about before, or written about before, which is hyper masculine, but also hyper evil, right? Marduk splits the dragon of chaos in half with his arrow, and her corpse becomes the order of the heavens and the earth, right? But and so archery itself is all about a kind of unified, violent, masculine focus of the eye, of the mind, the muscles, and the tools. And you condense all of your intention and all of your God-given powers into a very dense and narrow point. Like that's very masculine, right? It's referenced in biology as well as in our minds. And so that's a very masculine trait. And you know, that focused determination to solve a problem by breaking it into parts.
Yeah.
And that's
If I
true
may-
whether the problem is shooting a deer in the woods or launching an artillery shell across a battlefield or penetrating some mystery using the tools of science, right? The primary goal is deconstruction of the target. But
Yeah.
what makes it moral or tonic is your reason for doing that and what you do with those results. You know, I mean, a dead deer doesn't magically turn into a healthy meal any more than a dead dragon magically turns into a morally ordered universe. Right? The real danger with either masculine or feminine traits is they could tip over into mindless destruction in the masculine version.
Mhm.
And I think in the feminine version, a kind of hyper emotive tyranny and safety cultism, almost like what John Carter might call that the devouring mother, for example, right? That can also happen when femininity goes off the reservation.
Mhm.
And I think there's a very fine line between in the masculine focused deconstruction that's useful and morally sane and just blowing shit up and hoping for the best.
Mm-hmm. So you
Yeah.
guys can keep going, but whenever you guys are done covering this subject, I want to ask you guys what the longhouse is, because the tradcon men are figuring it out. They're talking about this a lot. The leftist men not so much, but continue. Unless was that it? I saw you wanted to say something, Luke. I saw you in the corner.
Yeah, Luke.
Yeah, no, I wanted to riff a little bit about
Yeah.
on what Mark said just before we come to the longhouse, because I think it's an important point to talk about archetypes, right? Just as we just did, because I think the problem is, and you may have noticed that in online discussions and fist fight on Twitters and stuff like that, that it's really the other side always plays this definition game. It's about deconstructing words and robbing words of their meaning. And and they are try to force you to come up with definitions. So they will say, okay, masculinity, what is it? Give me a list of 10 things, define it. So what is it, femininity, in this situation? And the problem is that, I think it's just impossible really to give a list. It's just not how it works. And it's more like something archetypical, right? That comes from above, if you will, right? But that can manifest in different ways. And I think that's useful to know, because once you start playing these definition games, I like what Mark said about focus, right? I think it's a pretty good one. But notice that it's like something quite abstract, so you cannot really like pin it down so much, right? Because it's a bit on a higher level. But once you start defining it, and so you say, oh, a masculine man is someone who like works out and is fit, okay, but we all know like very masculine men who are fat, and it's
Yeah.
like you can always find examples, right? And so, and then you might say, oh, it's someone who's like very assertive, but then you have the guy who has like doesn't like leadership at all, but still is like kind of like a Superman, in other regards, and so you would call him masculine. So it's like, once you start playing these games, you're gonna lose. And I think that's really something one needs to keep in mind, especially in this climate, where you have to talk about this stuff. And it's a trap, and these definition games are like the basis for a lot of sophistry that's going on, and coming up with all kinds of stupid examples, right? And counter examples. And you can play these games, forever. But at the end of the day, we all know what masculinity is. We all know what femininity is. We talk about it, and nobody said, "Oh, wait a minute, you just said feminine. What does that mean? I don't know." No, we intuitively understand this stuff, right? And on a higher level, and we should defend, like our usage of these words and our intuitive understanding of it, and not play these games. That's something I wanted to make.
Yeah.
So,
I
Luke,
wanted to so I've been debating the left lately. I went on this random beat where I'm the only, I guess, conservative who is able to talk to these folks. Or maybe I'm just plain dumb. I haven't really decided yet, It makes for some good clicks, but they like to do that. Well, define masculine, define feminine, but then if you name one characteristic that's out of step, then they want it, well, what about that? That's obviously an exception to the rule. So like, how old are you, Luke? If you don't mind sharing.
I'm 40.
Okay, you're 40, right? So like it's natural to you, but these idiots that go to college, they get so educated they become stupid. They cannot tell the difference between what is a feminine spiritual quality and what is a masculine spiritual quality. Because the way that I see it is that it crosses all religions, all cultures through history of all time. You can just see evidence of these characteristics. I think the best refined definition I could have is that masculine is more of a penetrative show of force, and femininity is more passivity and nurturing. That's the biggest umbrella that I could say, but it's kind of dumb because you can look at your grandparents and there's going to be things that your grandpa does that are more masculine. Like mine likes to chop down tree limbs with a machete. That's just his thing because he's in the tropics in Florida. And then, my grandmother, she just really enjoys cooking a big pot of rice. But you have to describe these things to the left. Well, why do they exist? Because it makes them feel good. It's not like a reason. It's just something that we should be able to understand. So
you basically need to talk about it like concretely, right? And talk about it in depth, and give examples and tell stories from real life, and I think there's another way. But frankly, some of these people, there's probably not much you can do, right? It's like, I mean, if you don't like get like super basic things that are like obvious intuitively, if you you try to define that away and play like little abstraction games, you can do that forever.
And they make these interesting points too. So I'll say that this was one instance that I ran into that's, I think, would probably illustrate your point as well. So I was debating a non-binary woman. For some reason, a lot of folks that are non-binary tend to be women. Riddle me that, I'll never understand. But she was arguing predeterministic genes that made her non-maternal, that she just couldn't relate to women, which, okay, I mean, I could easily dispute that just on the simple fact of the hormones. However, we're like, let's allow it. But when I said that I was a woman who liked to stay home, depend on my husband, and I want to raise my kids at home, then the argumentation shifted to where I had been socially conditioned to want that. So when she doesn't want to be a mom, or she's non-maternal, then there's predeterministic genes. But then when I want to stay home, raise a family, serve my husband, then I'm socially conditioned. So like you're right about so much. I saw John, and then after John, let's talk about the Longhouse, because most people I don't think are that familiar with it. I'm happy that it's taking off because I'm sick of the gynocentric social order. So go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to quip that I guess Luke is saying that masculinity is like porn. You know it when you see it. Let's move on to the Longhouse.
You want to? Yeah, let's do it. What? Okay.
Let's move on to the Longhouse.
So
I was just writing about this a couple of articles ago, and the devouring mother that Mark mentioned. And in my mind, at least, these are linked, right? So the Longhouse is a meme that's been circulating in the dissident right for a few years now. Sort of inside the right-wing bodybuilder kind of community, especially. And it sort of refers to this very communal way of living that predominated in the upper Neolithic with the European farmers that who are believed to have had this sort of very matriarchal society in which the spirits of men would be, crushed by the matriarchy in order to sort of maintain social stability. And that, kept their society stable for some time because they don't have all of this wild male energy running around tearing things apart. Then the Proto-Indo-Europeans show up in their chariots and their warrior culture with their patriarchal Skyfather spiritual tradition and just annihilated them. So that's kind of the origin of that term. And the reason it's become so popular, of course, is that looking around, we can see this kind of digital longhouse being erected all around us where, if you're a young guy, especially, but you don't even have to be that young. You can just feel yourself being hemmed in on every side by all of the rules and regulations, the social expectations, the constant staring eyeball of social media, the speech codes, just all of it. And, this goes back to the tonic masculinity thing as well, because there's the constant shaming of any form of sort of vital masculine energy. And where the devouring mother kind of comes into this, and at least in my mind, is that's kind of the nurturing aspect of femininity become pathological, where the mother does not, in order for a child to mature, the mother has to kind of step back at a certain point, and stop protecting the child so much. Doc Hammer had a really good piece a few weeks ago, The Wild Wood, something like that, where he sort of he described this dynamic. When a kid starts out as a baby, it needs to be protected. It's completely helpless, and as it grows in strength, you can expose it to more of the world, but you have to accept that kid is going to hurt itself more easily. And eventually, in order to become a fully functioning adult, the child must enter into the father's world, where there are sharp edges all over the place and you can literally die. So the devouring mother is the mother that refuses to allow this to happen. And because she's so desperate to protect the child from any harm at all, that she smothers the child's development. And, safe spaces and trigger words and, all of the helicopter parenting and zero tolerance policies for everything. And the general disappearance of fun all sort of, are consistent with that. And, we can see real consequences of that for the mental and emotional health of young people in the world today, which is worse than it's been in generations, maybe in recorded history. They are depressed, they're anxious, they're committing suicide, they're using, hard drugs, they hate their lives, they're not having sex, they're not going to parties, they're really lame. It's just terrible.
They're mutilating themselves.
They're literally
They're mutilating
cutting themselves. Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, more than cutting.
Mhm.
Like we have a whole transhuman movement essentially where people are
Oh,
literally sexually mutilating themselves, where young people are
Mhm.
being called into this communion with
Mhm.
something that's very dark.
Well, I'm
but-
a little bit confused on it because from my understanding, and so far this is anecdotal, but there's multiple mental health professionals that kind of work, I guess within psychology would be one avenue. I guess, and the other thing would be gender affirming clinics. So it seems like the moms just want their kids to feel okay. So, okay, you want to be trans, go ahead, do that. Because it's the right thing to do in their mind because they're worried about their children offing themselves. But the surgery is worse. Do you think that women are blind to that evil, that they're unfamiliar? Because to me, it's plain as day that if my daughter was to get a double mastectomy, she might not be able to breastfeed, later on in life. It seems obvious to me that if my child gets bottom surgery in adulthood, because I don't think that's happening to teens, but the hormone therapy is happening. It seems obvious to me that if my child were to become an adult and mutilate their genitals, that they might be dysfunctional. And then so who's going to want them? Who's going to want to marry them? Who's going to want to mate with them if they even can? Aside from that, the testosterone, the hormones, testosterone and the estrogen that they're prescribing to children, and it is happening because detransitioners are coming out every day. It does make your kids, dumber and more frazzled. So what's the disconnect for moms there? I mean, in your opinions, under this longhouse concept, because it's worse. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got something for this. So,
Mm-hmm.
To try and tie it all together, John talked about how there's this threat that the longhouse faces externally. So it's like it works great when you have a totalizing system, but it's vulnerable to a society or a culture that's willing to employ and use masculine traits. So I think that speaks a little bit to the imperative that the powers that be feel to make the longhouse truly global and totalizing, to eliminate that threat. One of the things that I feel most about it, given that I don't have all masculine traits, but one of the ones that I employ, I think a really good way to sum it up is related to something that Luke wrote about recently, which is superiority. Dare to know. It is a much more masculine trait to be willing to part with the social consensus. That is very difficult for most women to do. So if there's a social consensus, like, hey, this is what's normal, this is what's right, women have a very, very difficult time. So like even me, I remember one of my earliest like formative memories was going along with the crowd. And then being disgusted with myself in retrospect. And I was like, never again. But that is something that I've noticed in my professional career, that a trait that I have that displeases female colleagues. You know, they do not like it when you have a strong opinion that they disagree with, and you don't soften it a bit and say, hey, I can understand how, like, I could be wrong, you know, and do these necessary things to preserve feelings, because it's personal. Like, if you disagree, it's personal. And I think that is what is behind the whole trans thing. I think a lot of people feel when they see it, they're like, they have their reservations, especially a lot of women, I think, have the reservations, but that's the zeitgeist, you know, and they look around, they see, well, everybody else seems to think that you're a transphobe if you say anything that disagrees. All the quote unquote experts say that my kid's going to kill themselves if they don't do this. So I guess it's the right thing. Doesn't feel right, but the feeling of the social imperative and consensus outweighs their own internal reservations. I think that's what's going on.
So do you think this, sorry, I just have a question. I was thinking about this. So in terms of fitting in with society versus the well-being of their children, do you think that women have a hard time choosing one over the other?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, it's one and the same kind of, like, that's the thing. It's kind of going along with what the consensus is. You know, I think that's perceived as being the right thing to do. You know, it's impossible to disentangle the two. And like, the risk on the other side, like, we're talking about moderation and temperance and all that, and how that's a part of this. Like, the toxic and the shadow side of the masculine, you know, superiority is if you're wrong, right? If you don't have the epistemic humility to recognize that you can be wrong even when you're certain about things, that can lead to all sorts of dangers, where it's like, I'm certain that this is right and this is what we're doing, and you could be wrong on just a very fine point, and that could end in catastrophe. And so, like, but both strategies have ways that they could not work out terribly. But my big concern is that this susceptibility to social pressure is being weaponized by people with power that are vicious, evil people. And that is enabled by the Longhouse.
Okay, thank you. Mark, you wanted to chime in? Go ahead, do your thing.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just, speaking to something that Grant actually just he expounded upon, but he said it earlier, and I remember the woman, the female writer Teresa, I can't recall her last name at the moment, but like I recall, like, because we've been engaging with her, and I appreciate her work, you know, from a certain angle, but like there was something about, like, and I haven't really responded to her, but like there was something along the lines of like, oh, well, why shouldn't you just try to develop like talents and powers and abilities that aren't in your wheelhouse? Like, why shouldn't you just like focus on everything at once and try to build yourself up in every way? In other words, it's sort of like, if we were to say that empathy is more of a feminine attribute, let's say, right? Or let's say something like cooking, which is a feminine attribute that I have. I'm actually an excellent cook, right? And it's just sort of like, okay, so that's a feminine aspect of my being. Let's say that that's the case. It's sort of like, why would I waste time in building up things that I'm not naturally inclined to? Like, particularly in the situation that we find ourselves in, because I think we find ourselves in a very desperate situation, right? We find ourselves in a war, almost like something very evil has declared war on all of us. And in that war, I think it's more pertinent and like of better utility to focus on the things that we already have developed, whatever talents we have, be them masculine or feminine, whatever powers God gave us. I tend to think that like we should focus now, because the hour is late and desperate. We should focus on building those up, and then, as I think all of us have would agree with, find other people who can fill in the blanks for the stuff that we're not so good at, right? like that, become a ragtag band, right? A motley crew, like the Wolverines. I think that's the model that will win if we just focus on the things that we're already good at.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, of course we can build up other things, but like it might waste a lot of time. Is my only point.
Before we move on, we have 2 donations to the platform, so I'm just going to read them really quick. We have Zentiance out here, $49.99. He says, "How reputable are the so-called professions when they espouse the perversion of a child in the name of inclusivity? Women and weak men fail to see/acknowledge the dangers of kowtowing to the almighty dollar via supplicating to the emotions of the masses." Obviously, I agree. And then we have a $20 donation to the platform, $19.99, if you will, if you want to get specific. Correction, weak women and weak men, those who are more agreeable, which puts their children in direct harm's way. You know, that's the thing about if you are so fortunate enough to marry a masculine man, he'll just look at you in your face and tell you something is stupid. So shout out to the good dads out there. All right, so Dog Hammer, you wanted to continue?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of jump in because there's a lot of dots that I think can be connected here in kind of a nice way that kind of pulls us into the idea of what the hell happened. And I think a lot of us are kind of, we look around the world, oh my God, how did things get insane? And, way back, John Carter was pointing out that we used to be, in terms of philosophy and thought and what people, put a lot of brain power towards, we used to think a lot about, virtue and fortitude and prudence, temperance, justice, and all this sort of thing, and what was going on. And loud children, sorry. They're very excited too, I guess. But, what happened, right? As he said, he nailed it too. Right in the 18th century, we stopped talking about virtue. We started talking about values. And I joke a lot that, Adam Smith wrote the last word on virtue in 1750, and everybody else just got tired of writing commentary and moved on to something else. But in a way, it's kind of true in that right in the middle of the 1800s, you have, Rousseau was contemporary with Smith, but then you had the rise of the socialists, the communists, you have your Marxists coming on. Right in the middle of the 19th century, we start seeing a shift from, how does the individual make themselves good and great and worthy, and a shift to how do we make the state the center of what people care about? How do we sublimate what people are, human nature, and bend it to this idea of we're going to have some community that they're all going to serve like ants, right? We don't worry about how good the individual ant is, we worry about how good the hive is. Whereas before that, it was each individual themselves, how do you be a good person? And this is when we start seeing the same shift away from an idea of, what are humans like and how can humans be the best human they can be, to this idea of, a blank slate, that blank slateism where, basically everybody's exactly the same. You can, how somebody turns out as an adult is entirely dependent on how we raise them, how we teach them at the beginning. There's no human nature to speak of. And this idea of, leveling everyone into some interchangeable part. Every woman is every good at every man at every job and everything. Nobody has any special features. Nobody has any special talents or deficiencies. And therefore we can expect all outcomes to be equal. Right? And so we kind of think of this and how this goes together, you start seeing it casting a long shadow on the future. Right? We start seeing things like, well, we stopped caring about virtues, we stopped caring about values, which, John says is something in the marketplace. I always think of the kid in the meme saying, stop liking what I don't like. Right? And this is what our current focus has become on. Who likes the same things I do? Not who's virtuous, who's good, who's great, even if they have virtues I don't have, and I admire them for that. It's who cares about the same things I do. And if you don't care about the same things I do, then you're bad. Right? And then we look at things like, well, why is masculinity considered toxic? It's like, well, as Grant and others were saying, and Luke, men are more disagreeable. When it comes to somebody who's going to, be the one guy in the crowd crossing his arms instead of doing the Sieg Heil salute, it's going to be a guy because he's going to be the only one who's crotchety and angry enough to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. Stop. Or as you said, say it straight to your face. This is dumb. This is wrong. We should not do this. Right? If you want to have a totalized country, if you want to have totalitarianism and have one central, power structure with everybody exactly the same, that's the first thing you got to start doing is nailing down those proud males. You know, that was a really awkward.
That
sorry, but and yeah, and I was
that
going to say I was
reminds
really
me-
glad you came back,
Go ahead.
Harrison, because I was hoping to segue into you here.
Well, that reminded me of something that I was thinking about earlier. John might have something to say about this too, about the White Ribbon Brigade in England before or during World War One. I was just reading about this. I'd heard about it before, but it was in the context of like high asabiya cultures. So that kind of group, like national unity. And the idea was that in World War One, there was this one of the counters to the idea that of the kind of economic man that everyone only pursues self-interest and that cooperation is kind of impossible or a miasma. That in World War One, you had tons of people willingly enlist to the army to fight in World War One. And so how did this kind of mass cooperation take place? And so you had just tons of men who volunteered to, out of this sense of duty and cooperation and protection, and they all went to fight. But of course you still had the ones that didn't. And for the ones who didn't, you had the White Ribbon Brigade, who were women who kind of organized to shame all the men who were cowards, right? So if you weren't walking around in military uniform during World War One, on the streets of any British town, women would pin a white ribbon on you to show everyone else that you're a coward who's not doing what he should do to protect his society, his country. And so there's an interesting dynamic there, right? Because most I think it would probably be the case that most men would volunteer. You've only had a minority who didn't, who wouldn't, and some of those men might be doing so out of a sense of disagreeableness, like you said. They might have thought, well, no, like maybe they were against the war for some reason, against war in general for some reason. Some of them may have just been totally self-serving. No, I don't want to, I'm not going to put myself on the line. And they're just kind of, those kind of arguments or those kind of feelings didn't have an effect on them. But for at least some of those men, the shaming aspect from the moralist, the moralizing women's groups did have an effect, because they then had added on top of that this social shaming. And so when you guys were all talking about the trans issue with the parents, the mothers, and what's going on there, it seems like that's a similar dynamic and a similar expression of this kind of heightened sensitivity to social conformity when it's in the interests of protecting, or just protecting in some group somewhere somehow. In this case, the official line is that we need to protect trans kids. They need our protection. And so then the part of the formula is the way to protect them is to put them on hormones and have gender reassignment surgery. And so in their minds, like you were saying, that is the way of protecting. They don't see it on some level as an evil or as a harm or as a long-term harm, because that's just what everyone does, and that's the way things are. So then when there's a parent, or like a husband, or just a parent in some other context that they don't know, who doesn't get on board with that, that's when the moralizing comes out, and that's when the white ribbon gets pinned on the dissenting parent who says no. It's like, well, no, you're not protecting the children. So I just think that's
But isn't
part
that
of the
all?
dynamic what's going on there.
But isn't that also weakness, Harrison? Like when we're talking about, like, if somebody pinned a white ribbon on me, I would cast it off. I would probably throw it in their face. I would not not stand for it. I would say this is, in other words, there's an element of physical valor, let's say, to masculinity as well. And to say, no, I'm not going to sit here and allow you to shame me or define me. You are an evil person. You're lost in a dark forest, and that's not going. That tactic won't work on me. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like in other words, like, isn't it? self-feminizing to some degree to say, okay, your tactics are valid.
Well, I think that's the thing to consider here, is that we're not dealing with sort of isolated questions, that you have to see a lot of what's going on in the left and the wokeism as it's a religion. In a very real sense, this is a totalized worldview. And very much of it is they accept these are certain tenets that we say are right. And like most religions, there's people that say, yes, I agree this is right, even though I don't want to do it all the time. And so when somebody wags their finger at you and says, hey, this is right, you say, well, okay, yeah, you're right. I agree. I know this is right. I failed. And so they're going to submit to it. But then at the same time, looking at it from that perspective explains why you see these women, these mothers, who are going on, Twitter and doing little thumbs up pictures with some, surgeon who said, yay, she cut off my 12-year-old daughter's tits and has her on, therapy. And it's disgusting. You think, well, why are they doing it? Because you can kind of understand from the protective side. You say, okay, this is done. Why are you advertising it? The advertising is, I'm willing to sacrifice something, my child, put them across to show my purity. This is how dedicated I am to our religion, how dedicated I am to your group. And this gets into the idea of religion as a club good, where you need some way to keep out freeloaders so everybody else in the religion can get the benefits, right? Just like any sort of normal club, you got to have some way of excluding people who don't pay their dues. And one way of doing that is, most religions and most social groups in general like that, is to say who can have the most costly beliefs, who can do the things, who can really show this is how dedicated I am. I sacrificed my child to show how virtuous I am because I don't hold, I'm so sincere in my belief that I'm going to do this and I think it's right. No matter what's going on inside their head, what little bit of sanity and motherhood in the back is screaming, this is a terrible idea. You shouldn't do this. Going to the
Moloch, Ishtar, these are demons.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
seen them before.
Yeah.
This is why Carthage. This is why Rome destroyed Carthage and salted the earth, because this is what the Moloch worshippers there were doing. I just want to mention it was the White Feather movement, not the White Ribbon Brigade. They were handing out little white feathers because you were a chicken.
As well, but yeah.
Well, I think so. Mark is saying, basically this wouldn't have worked on me, which awesome, super amazing. But I think men are always going to be shamed for not going to war, not wanting to go to war. In general, as much as feminists want to pretend like they wouldn't ever do that, of course they would do that. What I would say was probably one of the more unsettling moments of my life. And this could be that I am a woman, or it could be that I'm in a military family. I'm not sure. But I was in a social sciences class. This was the day after Putin invaded Russia. People all want to say that that's not a declaration of war. Call it whatever you want. He did something, okay? So it became really apparent in the room the next day that a lot of these Gen Z men who were in undergrad were scared. The fear was palpable. And I just had not seen a group of men be scared like that before. But you can see where there is this blind assumption. Well, we haven't been drafted in 50 years. 50 years is not a long time to not be drafted. I don't understand why anyone thinks that that's a long time to not be drafted, because at the end of the day, they will draft men. Now, I would like to see if it will ever get to a point where we draft women as well. I mean, because I know that these folks are literally losing their minds, and that's not physically feasible, but we will see if they try. So I wanted to go on. Just real quick.
Can I just comment on what you just said?
You can. But I want to take this podcast to an hour and a half. So we have 12 minutes, if that's good for you guys. And go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned drafting women to go fight. So there's an Anon, well, I guess formerly Anon, Ricky Vaughn, who is in jail right now because he was the mastermind behind the Draft Our Daughters meme campaign at the end of the 2016 federal election, where they took Hillary Clinton's campaign formats, the ads from the format, and had all these images of women in uniform and talking about how they're going to be sent to go and fight the Russians and stuff like that, as a way of sort of demoralizing Hillary voters. And it was really funny, but the government didn't think it was so funny. But of course, you could be right that they might institute a draft for women. Who knows? I would be more concerned that they would introduce a male draft, and in the current context, with, I believe it's, Grant could correct me, but 75% of the young male population is unfit for service right now due to criminal records, drug abuse, and obesity. So, okay, who are the 25% who are going to be drafted? Well, obviously, those are the men who have their shit together, right? Who are in good shape, who don't have criminal records, which means, these are the conservative right-wing men, entirely, right? Who are precisely the ones that the power structure probably wants to get rid of in the first place. And they're the ones in the current context who are probably the least interested in dying in a war with Russia, I would imagine. So all of that could very much lead to a draft of that population.
John, it would also lead to a big baby boom if there's a draft with women. Because I don't know, those of you like Grant and Aly are in the military. I was in the National Guard, and so we're about to go on a deployment. All of a sudden, all the females magically get pregnant, all of the, or not all, but there's some who manage to go their entire time without ever deploying because they magically get pregnant whenever there's a op order coming down that will be mobilizing soon. So I guess that's one way to get the fertility rates up.
Yeah, Daniel. So not only is that true, but now you're non-deployable for a year after birth. So that's 9 months plus 1 year, and then waiverable for breastfeeding up to 2 years after birth if you're still lactating. So if you're planning on having a family of 3 or 4, having 3 or 4 kids, and you're a female soldier, you could easily go 20 years without deploying and essentially being guaranteed to not
That's
deploy.
a pretty good racket.
Or social engineering conflicts with biology, collides head on.
I mean, we're doing better than Elon is. Elon confuses me. In some ways he's great, in some ways he's just like, I don't know what he's doing, but he's always complaining about this fertility rate crisis and then doing things that would contribute to this crisis. I'm like, okay, sir. Why don't we get your
just watch Elon in a few years is going to come out with some kind of exo womb startup where he's just going to be like, just manufacture people to solve the birth rate crisis.
Yeah, I would not put it past him. Okay, but in any case, let's get your guys' closing thoughts on the Longhouse. We have some more donations to the platform. And
Aly, I want to just say one thing because they're not drafting my daughters. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be, they'll have to kill me. So just to be clear, that's an impediment. That's an impediment. Maybe they think that that'll be no problem, but go ahead and mark me down, intelligence community. You're not taking my daughters.
Well, there we go. Look at that. Somebody's one to put his muscle where his mouth is. That's what I'm looking for. But anyway, I mean, part of me is like, this would solve the birth rate crisis. But we have 2 donations, and then we have blank currency. Humor me, gentlemen. Humor me. I am well versed in red pill content. So blank currency with the $5 says women can be 304, but so can a man. King Solomon was punished. Sorry, Fresh and Fit fans. Thank you, blank currency. That was really, I'm glad that you shared that. We have a $5 donation to the platform. He says, overpopulation is satanic. Earth can sneeze and fart and most of us gone. It's bullcrap. Also, thank you for the donation. Truly appreciate it. Aside from that, because the young men that are watching, they don't understand what the Longhouse is. They're just, it was a hard concept for me to understand. I attribute it to gynocentrism and global homogenization. Is that what we're calling it? Is that the word? Did I make that up? Is that the word for it? It is? Okay. Yeah. So I've just noticed that everything's kind of catered to women politically and marketing wise. I think that I call it the George Soros patriarchy, but every time I say that, somebody says I have a tinfoil hat. But no, really, if you think about it, the globalist powers that be, They want women's votes and they want women's dollars. And you'll see too that even though women complain about this pay gap, which I'm not going to debunk right now, but it's been disproven a long time ago is disproven. It doesn't matter who's making more of the money because women are spending most of the money. So we still have access to the money in one way, shape, or form. So that's my perspective about how women are being pimped out and they're too stupid to see it. I've been going on podcasts lately with 18-year-olds. So clearly they're brainwashed to the effect that these women still haven't comprehended in their minds that they're creating the new patriarchy by putting trans women ahead or equal to biological women. They're not getting it. And like I said, I just can't wait for this stuff to crash and burn. I call it the she-cline. Everybody says enjoy the decline, enjoy the she-cline, enjoy the she-economy, have a good time with it. So let's get y'all's closing thoughts and then also tell the people where to find you guys. But it might just be that it's that one link with all of your Substacks as well, which is fine. And anybody?
You're first, Luke.
Should someone talk? Okay, I'll start. So you can find me at, again, The Cat Was Never Found on Substack. I do not engage in social media. I do not have a Twitter account. If you read my stuff, you'll understand why. Apart from that, like I would just like to say to young men out there, build teams. And again, not talking about giant armies, I'm talking about ragtag misfit bands. Find other men that you can cooperate with in a competitive way and build each other up because transform yourselves into the Fellowship, transform yourselves into the Avengers or whatever. Like find some way to cooperate in a masculine way because nobody else is going to save the world. It's not going to happen unless we do it. And that's it.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I have to direct you guys. Luke, do you want to go next? But it's only because it's my platform. I understand. I guess if it was up to me, if we were in a room, I would just let y'all do whatever, and I would make lemonade and cookies. People can judge me, but that's just what I like to do. But go ahead, Luke. So you're muted.
Right, I try to be polite, and that's the invoice that you get, right? So you can find me at luketalks.substack.com. I'm also on Twitter at luketalks. And closing remarks to echo what Mark said. For the guys out there, for the young guys, find good people around you, good guys around you that you can build something with them, that you can learn and grow together. And also, I think it's important to kind of navigate the fine line between rules and just charting your own course, right? Because I think it's also a kind of manly attribute to have your own vision, to develop your own vision, to do your own thing, to chart your own course, just not copy someone else's fate or some rule book that tells you, okay, you need to do this and that. That I don't consider that like really manly. But then again, you also need like inspiration and stuff. But yeah, do find your own course and way through life, and band together with other guys to help you out.
All right, let's do John. Wait, or unless Harrison, it was you, huh? You guys can fight over it. Go ahead.
So I'm stealing chic line. That is beautiful portmanteau. So you can find my stuff at Postcards from Barsoom on Substack. It's barsoom.substack.com. I'm on Telegrams from Barsoom, and I'm on Twitter as well. I'm not as wise as Mark, staying away from all social media at Martian Word Lord. It's word as in WYRD, weird. So I also want to mention that we're all 7 of us are available every day to talk to our paid subscribers on the Demos Station Slack, and you can get in there by subscribing to any one of our Substacks. So I just wanted to get that one out there. Closing remarks. Young guys, what do you do? So Luke and Mark have given excellent advice. What I would add to that, read old books. Pick up Plutarch, The Parallel Lives of the Greeks and Romans. Great reading, and it's an education in virtue, not by, theorizing about it, but by showing how it worked in people's lives. And lift weights, get in shape, don't be fat. God damn it. Grant can certainly help you with that. The man is a beast. Grant, you're up next.
Thanks, John. Very flattering. On that note, that goes into exactly what kind of dynamic is kind of unique that women don't necessarily have access to, and it's a real tragedy. But what is the Longhouse? It's enforced egalitarianism. Women do not like, for one, to stick out above the rest and be the best at anything. Their instincts rebel against that at a biological level. As men, we're competitive, but we can all have our thing, right? John's the hard science guy, if I came and I started acting like I was better at the hard sciences than him, it'd be like, please, and he would school me. Same deal with Eric in the social sciences and economics, or Luke in spirituality. We can form these groups where we can be excited and enthusiastic about various aspects of excellence in each other's being. And then that motivates us to be excellent. Whereas women always have to face this thing where if they're too excellent and they demonstrate too much strength, that it's offensive. And so they got to dial it back. We can be, it's easier for us as men to be enthusiastic about that, which is why, it's important to build these connections and recognize that the dynamics are different. So that's just what I wanted to add to what everybody else said. In terms of finding me, I do a podcast called Fifth Generation Leadership, and I write 2 Substacks, one kind of on Americanism and American politics, the other on human performance optimization. And all those can be found on the link tree, which we have a link tree for all 7 of us now that, hopefully people, all of us just put relevant podcast links whenever we do stuff, we can throw it on there so that people can access it. And hopefully we can do more of this kind of thing going forward. Over.
He said over. I'm dead. Okay, Doc Hammer, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll hop in. Largely what the other guys said. Well, first you can find myself on Doc Hammer's Anvil at Substack, Linktree, yada yada. Otherwise, I'm a Luddite and might just disappear into the woods one day after my daughters move out of the house. So till then, though, Substack, hey. But to jump on what John said, read old books. I wouldn't go so far back as Plutarch. It's been translated through 6 or 7 languages, through 6 or 7 people. It gets a little weird. But Adam Smith, Theory of Moral Sentiments. Get a copy. It's good. He's a very, very, Grant's smile, and I beat him down until he did this too. He's a very modern writer. He uses phrases like pretty much and things like that you expect to hear. He doesn't have, he uses commas with a shotgun. But other than that, totally readable. And you're going to get your big dose of how people work, what virtues are, huge amounts of history of how different people have thought about virtues. And I think that's really one of the biggest things that young people need to do. You're not going to learn it in school. In fact, you're actively going to be pushed away from it in school. And so, don't be educated into being stupid. Learn about virtue. Learn what kind of person you want to be. Find some exemplars and stories. Take the Lord of the Rings. Say, Aragorn, he's got some good things. Samwise, he's got some serious virtues. Think about the kind of person you want to be. Not just now when you're young and stupid and you can get away with a lot of stuff, but when you're 60, what kind of person are you going to want to have been? Find these exemplars and look up to them so that as you're going through life and you get to weird situations, you can think, okay, how do I be like John Wayne in this situation? Or, okay, maybe somebody who didn't die of a heart attack when he was like 50. So, if you're thinking towards 60 years old, but that sort of thing, right? You want to have those kind of ideas. How can I be like somebody who I respect and who I admire, and have them always in the back of your mind? So read old books, 1750s old enough, and yeah, do the best you can and talk to your friends about it. Bounce around ideas of what's good, what's not, what makes something better, what makes something worse, and just noodle on these sorts of things.
Thanks, Daniel. And can you start? And then Harrison, you'll close us out. And then I'll say something at the very end and we'll be done. This was your first live. Well, I mean, some of you have probably been live already, but first one on my channel. You guys made it. Okay, Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Aly. So I just say, you're not a blank slate. Like that's something that lesson I kind of learned the hard way, feeling like, in the back of my mind, I wanted, I guess before I got married, and had kids, like, I had this image of, if I was honest with myself, like traditional type of roles, but, my now ex-wife, it's like she was kind of a career woman and we kind of juggled the roles of parenting and career and all that. And it didn't really work very well. Not saying that people can't make that work, but it's just, I guess the people that came along and said, oh, we're blank slates. It's a social construct. They replaced whatever they thought was a social construct that was really rooted in, human nature with a new set of social constructs that are just totally arbitrary and run contrary to human nature. Just as one example, I was at my son's, when he was in first grade, so it was a few years ago, at his Christmas party during the school day. And at one point, the teacher said, every student, sit down, crisscross applesauce and just wait for the next thing, right? So at one point, I kid you not, every single boy without fail had gotten up, and was kind of pacing around, walking around, shifting around, and every single girl was still sitting patiently, legs folded on the floor, right? So it's just like, you see, even at a young age, these differences exist. It's rooted in our human nature, and there's an organized movement to get you to be disconnected from and alienated from your own human nature and to give you a set of artificial values. And that's going to make you weak and going to make you unhappy and going to make your relationships dysfunctional and all that. So it's like, look at, the cultures and the times throughout history when people have had healthy, happy, stable families and relationships, and see what made those ages and cultures different from our own, which seems not only to not incentivize happy marriages and, healthy households, but to actually disincentivize it and even incentivize the opposite. So, you're not crazy if you feel like the world's upside down. Just,
No, I say it to the women on my channel too. I'm like, girl, no, I promise being single at 30 is an entire cope. Like, do not listen to these women. Well, y'all got time. Y'all are men. It's different, but I talk to delusional women every day. Harrison, take us out.
So I don't have much to add. As final thoughts, I think all the other guys pretty much covered everything pretty well. So listen to what they had to say. I'll just add that my Substack is ponerology.substack.com, but I didn't explain what ponerology is. Ponerology is the science of evil. So it's a way of looking at evil from the perspective of a guy, a doctor, a Polish psychologist named Andrew Lobachevsky. And so as a way of balancing out kind of the positive recommendations for recognizing and instantiating virtue in oneself, there's another activity one can engage in, and that is to look at the examples of evil and how it manifests in the world, and to get a deep awareness of personality disorders, because a lot of the evils that we see in the world are perpetrated and exemplified by, coincidentally, people with, or not, people with personality disorders, the most extreme being psychopathy. So that is kind of one of the main focuses of ponerology, is what I write about. But of course, that gets into all kinds of areas and different kinds of topics. So if you're interested in evil, how it manifests in social structures and politics and culture wars, then that's the kind of thing I write about. So thank you, Aly, for being a great host for a bunch of bros. And
yeah, thank you, Aly. And congratulations on your pregnancy, and the
Mhm.
best are my best wishes to you. And thank you. And thank you, Grant, for getting the ball rolling.
Oh yeah. Well, Grant is someone I wish would run for president, but he's busy
Yeah.
trying to save the military and have a family, which I think is just rude. You should just run for president. But no,
What's
thanks
up,
for
Grant?
Well,
do
Brandon
do
has
the
shown that he
thing.
can be 100 years old and run for president, so he's got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Grant's got the
Right.
perfect name
Yeah,
for a president.
I got 50
Grant
years or
Smith.
so.
Yeah, I know, right? That would be an arguably American masculine name, Grant Smith. But thanks for coming, guys. Yes, so gentlemen, if you're watching, make sure you check out these folks' platforms. Women too, if you're just curious about some of the subject matter that they talk about, because I know women are tired of the wokeness too. But I just wanted to get you guys together as a personal favor, yes, but like a well deserved personal favor, but also the world doesn't care about men, and neither does psychology. Psychology doesn't give a damn about y'all. So if you're going to explore these concepts, it's probably good to do it in a group of friends. I know that friendships are a problem for men these days. It's not just relationships with women. Just having that male friendship can be a challenge. So here you go. Here is this masculine community that can probably put a thorn in. Let's see here. We got Jordan Peterson, we got Lex Friedman, we got Tim Pool. Like, arguably, I like these gentlemen, in their own ways. I like them. But if we could just get, an intellectual men's club, I just think that'd be the coolest thing in the world. So we will see you guys later. The gentlemen's links are in the description down below, and then Mind Matters is tagged in the title. Alrighty.